Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Chitheads. My guest today is Laura Amazzone. Laura is a teacher, writer, intuitive healer, yogini, and initiated priestess in the Shakta Tantra and Kaula Sri Vidya traditions of India and Nepal. She is the author of the award-winning book Goddess Durga and Sacred Female Power. She has published numerous articles within the fields of Hinduism, Tantra, and women's spirituality in many different encyclopedias, anthologies, journals, and also online publications. Laura teaches in the Yoga Philosophy program at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. She offers a diverse array of authentic and undiluted lineage-based rituals and spiritual practices, as well as pilgrimages to Nepal that promote spiritual empowerment and divine embodiment. So with that, hello, Laura. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hello, Jacob. Thank you for having me here.
So before we talk about the wonderful work that you do, particularly as it relates to the goddess practices and lineages, I'd just love to hear a little bit about your own personal story and what led you to this work that you do.
That's a big question. Let's see. I think it was just growing up in a very conservative Episcopalian and Catholic household in the Midwest, and really always having an interest in, the mystical, the unseen, and not finding what I was seeking in the religious traditions in which I grew up, and also just kind of questioning where was the feminine, where was the female, and so that kind of opened up, a larger quest to find that, and always feeling like that was a missing piece, and so. Eventually even ended up in a graduate program specifically focusing on women and religion. But I've always been interested in women's spiritual history, women's stories, and especially how that has supported or helped to inform my own consciousness, my own understanding of my place in the world. And in my upbringing, too, I grew up within a very violent, abusive household. So obviously that factored in my own sense of disempowerment and a lot of health issues that came out of that. And in my own personal journey, there was a lot of just, again, searching for comfort, searching for solace, searching for a refuge. And that started coming to me at a pretty early age through visions, through dreams of this dark, divine mother. And I didn't have any sense of what that was or what that meant. And then, of course, my own studies opened that more and more and just revealed, that there was indeed something greater that I had been intuiting all along, and kind of gave a language more for this. Yeah. Present.
So the presence, did you, before you kind of had the concepts and the understanding that allowed you to kind of filter that experience into something you might call the divine feminine, did you experience it as something feminine, or was that more something that, looking back, you realized that's what it was?
That's a good question. No, I did experience it as feminine. I definitely experienced, because it always was this kind of shadowy female figure that was very strong, very fierce, but she wasn't frightening to me. I would see her in dreams, or I would have these, especially when I was in altered states from the pain, from just certain illnesses and physical experiences I was having, sort of almost like hallucinogenic, vision of her. So there was that. And then when I, started doing more the research, even before I got into the program, I was amazed to find there was this whole wealth of material that women had been researching on the goddess in ancient culture around the world, and even discovering that within the Judeo-Christian traditions, there she was. There is, feminine, there's goddess, there's, Ma. And so, there was always a lot of synchronicities, or a lot of displays that fascinated me.
Yeah.
And obviously, just given the difficulty in my own personal life, or just the physical struggles, not only from the family, that I was growing up with, but just with my health, again, this was a refuge, and just showed me there was something else beyond the suffering that I was in. It was something beyond, that was much greater.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. So I'm interested actually to hear, you're saying that you found the feminine in the Christian tradition. Are you referring to Mary, or do you find some presence of the feminine in other aspects of the Christian tradition?
Um, Absolutely, Mary. Well, I'll fast forward many, many years into it was in the late 90s when I started my program at the California graduate program at the master's program at the California Institute of Integral Studies.
Hmm.
And I was getting a degree in philosophy and religion with an emphasis in women's spirituality and Asian comparative studies.
Yeah.
And one of the first courses I took was with Charlene Spretnak, and it was called Mary, Goddess of the West. And looking at Mary, within Christianity, but also tracing her back to Isis and the whole Isis mythology and history in Egypt, and then even going into even earlier pre-Christian cultures. And so it was, in the beginning, Mary and then Sophia, of course, these different names that we came to know within that tradition, the Christian tradition, but really earlier forms of her that had been worshipped for thousands and thousands of years. And I discovered in that program, too, that actually there was, over 25,000 years of history, women's spiritual history, that I had never even heard about, and that was there. And I mean, even starting with, you may be familiar with one of the earlier works within this field, Merlin Stone, When God Was a Woman, even just posing that question, what would it be like if God were female? And ultimately coming to feel that God is of course, beyond gender, but having a representation of the divine that was more resonant with my own experience or my own, self-image, or even looking at empowered models, where I know, and all the ways I didn't feel empowered as a female in this culture was just absolutely mind-blowing and incredible. And there's so much material out there, so many incredible feminist spirituality foremothers who have done this work, not only within these, the more Orthodox traditions, but outside of that, and looking even into indigenous culture and looking into Neolithic times, Paleolithic times, and showing there has always been this presence of the Divine Mother. In fact, one of the former directors of the Women's Spirituality Program, her name's Lucia Chiavola Birnbaum, speaks about the Dark Mother and says the oldest divinity on the planet is African and is female, and her symbol is the pubic V.
Mm. Mm. So, it's interesting, and I want to go back to something that you kind of mentioned in passing, which is this idea of, the iconography, and from one perspective, this is beyond gender, and sort of this is where I feel like I'm sort of coming to this place now where the iconography is sort of taking on a new kind of significance, where, I grew up similar to you in a kind of Judeo-Christian household that was very conservative, and obviously the representation of God was very patriarchal. And then, when I left that behind, when I did sort of regain a sense of divinity, then for me it had to be abstract. It had to be sort of beyond these dualistic categories. But now I feel like things have shifted, and I'm more receptive. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about what is the significance of the iconography. Like, what do we have to gain from, images, representations of divinity that are gendered?
Okay, that's a great question. So, where do we even start with that? Right. So let's just start with these incredible goddess figurines we find in the Paleolithic, Neolithic, even going back to what is the Danube River civilization, or what the archaeologist, linguist Maria Gimbutas, I don't know if you're familiar with her work, called Old Europe, where there is this predominance of female figurines and evidence of a completely different social structure. We can talk about that more later, but it is important to acknowledge that in these ancient cultures that women were at the center. It doesn't mean it was exclusive of men, but there was no evidence of fortification or any weapons and so forth. And there is a predominance of these female figurines that are large-breasted, often have large bellies. They're genitals are really pronounced, and there is an honoring, an emphasis of celebration of the female body. And I think what is, for me personally, has been so empowering when, my body has felt so objectified. The female body is so objectified and exploited and maligned, or even the power of our sexuality, the ways that that has been co-opted and really exploited, all the violence. So to see that here's this ancient culture, not just one region, we can go all over the world and see this. It was, absolutely incredible just to have that experience and to see, that mirroring of the body. And especially because I also was struggling with a lot of endometriosis, so a lot of gynecological issues and severe pain around my sexuality. So for one, there's that, and to see, okay, yes, the divine is represented, is honored as female. And then just looking at her, all the thousands and thousands of representations of her, again, in, every culture, and looking at the similarities, whether it is in the honoring of the body or, her breasts, her genitalia, even the tools, that this understanding of her connection to the cycles, to the lunar cycle, to the agricultural cycles, to the earth, the harvest. So also feeling that, sense of meaning and belonging within the universe. And then to come into, what I've specialized in and what has been very significant for me is studying and relating to the iconography of these Shakta Tantric goddesses,
Yes.
that originally, though, are not anthropomorphized. They're worshipped as a stone in the earth, or maybe the stone is rubbed red, or there's blood offerings given to it. And Vicki Noble had pointed out in her book Shakti Woman, quoting another scholar, that the original blood on the altar was menstrual blood. This is the only blood that can be offered without inflicting a wound. And then even just looking into the power of the menstrual cycle, again, here is a whole other arena where women feel just so disempowered or ashamed, or calling the cycle or monthly cycle a curse. And then here we have this connection to the lunar cycle, or to the oceans. I mean, it's just fascinating to see the reverence for that. So originally, just to not go off too much of a tangent on that, you have these anthropomorphic forms, or she's worshipped as a tree, or you see within the trees what looks like very specific female imagery, very yonic formations, or again, just this honoring of our interrelationship with the vegetative world or the animal world or the earth. And so there's that. And then how she became more stylized, more anthropomorphized. And here we have these representations, both fierce and benevolent. But the fierce, I find, are very useful in seeing these divine females holding these weapons, but they're not literal weapons. These are spiritual symbols. It's an iconography for our spiritual journey, a journey of consciousness, evolution of consciousness. And I think there's definitely ways that they've been appropriated and misinterpreted, and there's always a danger in that. But really at the core is this honoring of power. And, and it's not only obviously a female power, it's about Shakti, which is a dynamic, animating power, and Shakti in union with the Shiva energy, these, the masculine, these complementary energies that are inherent in all existence. And yes, maybe we tend to understand Shakti as more female or feminine, or Shiva is more masculine. But if you think even within the Taoist traditions, you have yin yang, it's the reverse, that the yin is the white, the feminine is really what we're referring to as the Shiva qualities, those receptive qualities. So it's an opportunity to really deconstruct a lot of the conditioning that we have around what it means to be quote unquote male, female, to be in this world, to really connect with the divine, like you had mentioned, going out and needing to have an abstract connection. And for me, it's been about how do I embody this within myself, not looking outside to the source, but both looking, outside and within.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So now, since we're sort of segueing into this kind of nicely, I'd love to talk a little bit more directly about Goddess Durga, since you did write this beautiful book, Goddess Durga and Sacred Female Power. So who is Durga, just for those who are maybe new? And can you tell us maybe one of the myths of Durga to help us understand her significance?
Sure, absolutely. So Goddess Durga is a goddess of strength. She's a goddess of courage. She's known as the remover of fears, the reliever of difficulties, she alleviates suffering in all its forms. And her myth is actually is fascinating and completely relevant for these times. And it's actually a myth that dates back to the 5th century of the Common Era, and it's from the text, the Devi Mahatmyam. And the story goes, just in brief, kind of in general, is that there were these demonic forces that were destroying the equilibrium of all the worlds. And they had this particular demon in charge of it all, had received some boons, and meaning that he had received kind of these blessings that he would be undefeatable. And he had asked specifically that no one could defeat him. And then when the creator God who was offering him these boons said, okay, no one, well, what about a woman? And he said very arrogantly, oh, that won't be a problem. So essentially what happens is he's going along, just creating all this havoc, and the male gods are all powerless. They're not able to stop this demon and all the violence and bloodshed. And they know that it's ultimately the power of the Divine Mother, the supreme consciousness, which from this orientation, the supreme is viewed as the Divine Mother. It's only her power, it's only her fierce compassion that can stop this demon from his destruction. So they call her forth, and she comes, because we know that about Durga, she's very immediate. She actually even says at the end of her myth, if you're ever in distress, if you're ever in need, or suffering anyway, call on me, and I will come. So they call on her, and then there's a series of battles. It's actually 13 chapters, fascinating, of these battles that she engages in with these demons. Now, who are the demons ultimately? You can understand this myth from, a lot of different perspectives, but really what interests me is to look at them as the afflicted ego, right, as that we each have this. Well, it may be mirrored in the outer world, or we may say, oh, okay, that's exactly what's happening now, but really looking within and seeing how our own ignorance, our own greed, our own hatred, our own, but you name it, is really what this Divine Mother is coming, that we're calling on her for, to come and transform. And while this is a battle that she's engaging in, and it's this epic battle, it's amazing too, and the way that it's expressed. Ultimately, it's again not, representative of outer violence or warfare. It's just about our own struggles. And we see even that in the beginning of the story, her name isn't Durga. It's actually, she has many other names, Ambika, Chandika, Parvati, and so forth. And it's the demon whose name is Durgama. And at the end of the story, she says, I want to be called Durga now, to show that ultimately these demons are a part of me. This is a part of my play. And she absorbs these demonic forces, the asuras, back into herself to restore the peace and justice in the worlds again.
Wow, that's beautiful. So one thing that I really found interesting about your book was that, it has this kind of polemical spirit, and we're already kind of talking about this in that, you discuss the goddess as a way of cultivating female empowerment. And I know your thoughts have sort of shifted, so I'd love to hear you maybe first talk just about kind of your intentions behind writing the book as a means for cultivating female empowerment based on your own experience, and then maybe we can sort of segue into how your thoughts on this have shifted since writing the book.
Okay. So originally, when I was writing it, of course, it was very much coming out of my own personal experiences, as I shared with struggles around my body, health, being female in this culture, um, but also as a scholar too, was really asking again and again, where are the women, especially within these tantric traditions, classical
Yeah.
tantric traditions, and where are their stories? And yes, we know of Lala, within the Shaivite tradition, her poetry, a little bit about her, or Mirabai, but so often there's these references to the yoginis and so little, even the chakras of the yoginis, very little work that has been done, academic research on them. And so I'm just curious, what was their experience? So often we're hearing it through the male view or the Brahmanic lens of, them telling the myths or having the practices and needing the female practitioner to achieve liberation. And some of the practices, or at least some of the texts, are positing that. But what about her experience?
Yeah.
What about the female experience? And that was not there, and it was so heavily male oriented. I wanted to address that and also bring in my personal experience of what it meant to be in touch with my own power in this way. And when I wrote this book, Durga was not in a household word at all. She wasn't even in the yoga community. It took me 9 years to get this book published. It came out of my master's thesis, which had been completed in 2001. So I think for me it was also just trying to fill a gap too, or provide a different perspective, and to show that just sort of not even to show, but really to pose the question, like, where are the women? What is women's experience? What would it mean if we related differently or understood what it meant to be a practitioner or to be engaging with this tradition, and not in a way that was appropriating or disrespectful, but really to honor the powers, and embody the powers that are coming through the teachings. And it was very hard too to find female teachers too at that time. That was another area that was so dominated by the male experience.
Yeah.
And so that was, kind of what had opened me into writing this and exploring it and sharing it in the way that I did. And I mean, of course, it's not about only the female experience, but just that the female experience has been so eclipsed, so,
Right.
disrespected, not included, all of that I wanted to offer that. Now it's very interesting to see how she is becoming more and more known and embraced, both by male and female practitioners. I do feel that there is a way that all these goddesses within these traditions a lot of times are used, appropriated for more selfish means, or that instant gratification that we know, we're so conditioned in the West. And it's like, okay, go to Lakshmi. You want a husband, you want money, you want a new car, you want to be famous, call on Lakshmi. And it's in my experience and my view, it's not the right approach. And we're talking about goddess. We're talking about absolute consciousness. This isn't something that is light, that it's really about having respect and understanding what these paths are about, and even Tantra and the way that Tantra has been appropriated and is really not understood in some of the more New Age circles, that it's really a path, a challenging path. It's not a path for mainstream culture. It's not a path for everyone. And I don't even say that from an elitist position. It's about being able to confront your shit, right? Like really your own ignorance, and really being able to embrace and transform these afflictions and difficulties, and really look at power and how we use power and misuse power, and what are we talking about when we talk about power. And I think too, as maybe we'll talk about this more. You'd mentioned this at the beginning. I mean, I'm a scholar and a practitioner, and I'm so grateful for the initiations that I've received, that I do work with an incredible yogini adept who's from Bihar, who does not want to be in the public, who doesn't even want to be named, and has, taught me and our Sangha so much about this path, and these goddesses are actually fields of consciousness. A lot of times they're approached as archetypes. They're not archetypes. These are living fields of reality with a capital R, and they have different bhavs, different moods, different expressions, different characteristics, and we work with them always with the aim of liberation from samsara, from the bonds, of these habitual thoughts, patterns, suffering. But it's not only for our own liberation, but the liberation for all. And so it's very mixed. I mean, it's just the way, obviously, the world works, that here suddenly these goddesses are getting a lot of attention, but it is misused. And I think it also can be misused by women in a way of, I'm a goddess, you're a goddess, that means I can do whatever I want, I can treat everyone, men included, in this way. That's not what we're talking about here with these goddesses and female empowerment. How do we hold that power? How do we relate with others? That, not only other humans, regardless of sex or gender, but also with the natural world, with the environment, and so forth.
Yeah. So it's I want to go back to something you just said, because I'm really interested in a little more detail on this. The difference between seeing these as archetypes, which, you're right, this is a very common kind of refrain, these are all archetypes, they're metaphors, blah, blah, blah. But what is the difference between engaging with these as archetypes versus what you're offering? So maybe you can unpack a little more what we mean by archetype and why that is sort of a wrong-headed approach.
Give me a moment to think about this. There's something to me, just in the way that it's been presented. They're presented as archetypes. It doesn't give them or honor them in their full potency or power as, expressions of the absolute consciousness.
Yeah.
And there's some ways to, how do I say this? Well, let me just speak of more from my own experience of them. So as fields of consciousness, if I'm interacting with Durga as a field of consciousness, there are certain experiences that come with that. But I don't necessarily want to define it or limit it to those experiences, but we know that it will have some resonance with power, our internal sense of power, expressing this power with strength, with confidence, with courage, with really confronting fears, both on an everyday personal level to even a more existential level. Even if we take Kali, for example, so Kali is both feared and respected, but sometimes I've seen others, kind of approach her in a way, if they want to, I don't know how to say this, but it's just interesting to watch this dance, for example, with Kali. And there's a lot of time people say, oh, no, I don't want to work with Kali because she's going to take everything away from me.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, but let's talk about attachments. Let's talk about what you're afraid of having taken away, and what really is the larger view. What is really Kali about? She's not here. She's not a punishing mother. She's not going to take away everything unless it's not ours to have anymore, or if there's some growth, there's some lesson. There's such a way that we deny in this culture, or there's an overemphasis on the bliss and the, it's all love and light in a lot of these circles, which it's wonderful, especially when there is so much suffering and so much, violence or struggle, that we have places like that, but in a way that it's spiritually bypassing the greater reality of honoring what this so-called darkness is, and really reclaiming the dark in a sense of it's the mysterious, it's this unknown power, it's Ma, as in her fecundity, it's a mystery, the great mystery. And so it's like the way that maybe people are choosing, or we're taught to choose, oh, okay, I'm going to work with this archetype because she's quote unquote safe. But no, I'm not going to go in this territory with Kali because I don't want to let go of my privilege, or I don't want to let go of this position because my mind is telling me that makes me someone. I'm attached to that identity.
Yeah.
And if we're looking at Kali, she helps us go beyond that and asks, what is real? What is illusion? What are our delusions? Why am I attached to presenting myself in this particular identity? What do I think I'm going to gain? And really, why am I here? What is it that I am exploring or fulfilling, or what is my path to embody? And of course, again, this goes back to, this is not a path for everyone. And it's in my own experience, it really hasn't even been a path of choice. Yes, of course, there's choices on it, but just my own experiences that led me here. It was a deeper calling, and definitely a feeling of dharma, which I really resisted too because of the challenges with it. But again, to say that the Divine Mother, even though she has these fierce and wrathful and often terrifying forms, really, we need to ask, well, who is terrified? What part of me is terrified? And what is so terrifying? She's not punishing. She's not there to hurt us. It's always there for our greater evolution or transformation or healing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you said that about Kali, because I've always been moved and called towards Kali, but you encounter a lot, I feel like, a kind of very superstitious attitude about her. Like, if she's in your house, you're going to get hit by a car or something. You know what I mean? So anyway, I'm glad you sort of pointed out that. And also, I think, when you move into some of the Shakta lineages, you can see Kali as more expansive than this kind of reductive way of thinking about her, which I think is maybe more characteristic of kind of popular Hinduism's conception rather than what some of the tantric traditions are saying.
Exactly. More dualistic even in that approach of, she's the bad, the mean, scary mother.
Yeah.
But, and just looking at her iconography, you'd asked about that there. It's to the initiated, or those that really, have worked with her or have received the teachings, authentic teachings. We know, that skirt of severed arms means something different than it just being a bunch of arms. It, refers to Durga, or there's even the corpses. There is an understanding of the inevitability of death and our mortality. And a lot of these practices also are structured around that, too. So she's ultimately, in my experience, I love this mother. She's the Divine Mother. She is the love that comes from this mother is like nothing I've ever experienced. It's very humbling. She's awesome in so many ways. And she's she's everything. She's this great force, not something to be reduced to, the devilish, depictions of her that are so feared, or where people are holding at arm's length.
Now, am I right that in the story when Kali destroys the demons, she's a manifestation of Durga? Is that correct?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's, of course, different lineages, and looking back to, she's the ancient, wild, tribal, indigenous goddess of the forest. What's interesting about Kali, too, of all of the goddesses in the more orthodox pantheon, I'm talking outside of the tantric lineages, she seems to have retained her earlier wild, untamable essence. She's that force within all of us, within the world, that cannot be tamed, that cannot be subdued. We can try and marginalize her, send her out to the periphery, but she remains. And while these other goddesses, and this is something I explored in my book too, Lakshmi, yes, her presence in the Orthodox tradition seems to be more spouseified or domesticated. That's a term coined by, I think it was John Strawley, or if I'm saying his name correctly. But there's been, scholarship looking at her or Saraswati in the way that these deities, in their appearance, it's like they've had their wings are clipped. They're not allowed to express the fullness of their power because we have such a fear of the unknown. We have such a fear of destruction or death or even illness. My own experience with my with illness was such a deep teaching. In some of the Shakta lineages, there's this view that if you're ill, you're possessed by the goddess, that she brings the illness, she is the illness, and she removes it. And it is an experience of an alternate consciousness. And again, that's where we have to watch what our judgments are, how we're interpreting what that means. And yes, it is very challenging, especially when there's extreme physical, mental, emotional suffering. But yet there's an opportunity to move through those, that suffering, that pain, into a deeper understanding or an expansion of consciousness that goes beyond the limitations of this physical body, and in this world is more inclusive.
Mm-hmm. So you had mentioned a little bit ago the Brahmanical tradition, and in your book you distinguish between two cultures, the patriarchal Brahmanical tradition and the matriarchal goddess-centered tradition. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the history of these two streams and maybe how the patriarchal mode became central.
Oh, it's such a large question. I don't know if I can answer that.
Okay.
I can answer that, but talk about the streams. So,
or maybe just a little bit more information about how the Brahmanical is a patriarchal kind of stream.
Okay. Give me a moment to think about this. So if you think of these, or, just in looking at the oral traditions, and of course, if these are oral traditions, these earlier oral traditions, so not much has been recorded or written down, or just some of the folk practices, indigenous practices, not only in South Asia, which we still, there's so much more research that needs to be done in terms of the archaeology and really looking at what these earlier civilizations were like. We even see within the Saraswati Valley civilization or the Indus Valley civilization. Are you familiar with that culture?
Mm-hmm.
Again, evidence that does of what seems to be more female-centered beliefs, or there is more of a predominance of female figurines, hundreds, literally hundreds that are found there, these seal stones. It's very disputed, of course, even the language presented on these, or the script that's presented on these seal stones, but it does seem to speak to different values. And that point, though, it's a turning point, though, too. I think there, in that period around 3500 BCE, but if you go back even earlier, in either direction that you go, you do find these civilizations, again, that don't have evidence of weapons or fortification, are highly sophisticated in their expression of art and so forth. And yet there was a switch, there is a change, and there's different theories on, how that came about, and in the different regions of, where, how, and where, and when. But just to speak to this Brahmanization or Sanskritization, which you had asked me about, that is a term that's coined by, I first heard it from the director of Asian Studies, Dr. Jim Ryan, but it was coined by a scholar, I think it was his name was M.N. Srinivas. And it's just speaking to the way that the indigenous, the folk cultures, these ancient agrarian cultures got assimilated into another fold, this Brahmanic fold. And of course that ties into the whole caste system, and even the ways that women were excluded from a lot of the practices and traditions. Here you have a language that was taught by men, predominantly Brahmin men, to other men, and even rituals where women are not allowed to participate, or just by not even being educated to be literate to be part of that. So even there's some that have interpreted the Devi Mahatmya myth, this myth of Durga, as a confrontation between the indigenous goddess, more goddess-centered, loving peoples, and another culture that had come in. So of course, there's a lot more research that that needs to be done, but there is a distinction in the values or the way the role of the female, the presentation of the female, that we find between these two streams.
I find this topic of Sanskritization really interesting because on one level I totally understand historically why this makes sense, but on the other hand I just feel kind of conflicted because I have kind of, personally a sort of budding love affair with Sanskrit, and I'm
Yeah,
beginning to study it more deeply, and I love the language, and I think it's beautiful, and I'm very attracted to kind of the more esoteric streams of Tantra that focus on kind of the linguistic mysticism of Sanskrit. So I'm kind of curious, and that linguistic mysticism exists, so I'm thinking of like the 12 Kalis and different Shakta lineages. So when we get to those kind of obviously Shakta streams that are kind of, but still that are very much connected in the practices to a kind of, this linguistic mysticism that is rooted in Sanskrit. I mean, how are we to disentangle these two influences?
That's a great question. That's something that I'm exploring myself because I too have received these practices and I'm fascinated, with the Sanskrit practices and that are, just fascinating and their sophistication and their power, the potency. And it is a question, okay, when did this come about? And what does this mean around who does have access to these practices or even historically had access or that they are accessible to, even some of us in the West, but also even, where else are they relevant in South Asia today? So no, I agree there. It's definitely something that needs much more explanation or exploration and trying to understand it myself and even looking at the Vedas from a different perspective too, of looking for the feminine, the goddess there and the value of that. And a lot has come through my own teacher now, just in having this female teacher to interpret it through a different lens, not discussing the other lens, but it's been particularly useful, but it's nothing that I can really speak to confidently yet.
Yeah. So but it's not that you're necessarily aligned with kind of a rejection of Sanskrit altogether,
I think it's such an incredible, powerful, beautiful language, but just looking as a scholar historically, or especially the influences of when I was writing my book or working on my master's thesis, there was a lot of just seeing the way that that patriarch. We've only lived within the past 5,000 years underneath this patriarchal, structure, and that there is a whole other. Other social systems that were there and existed for thousands of years, even longer. And so what happened and why? But then again, if we take the view that she is everything and this is all her play, then also have to open into, okay, well, then she wanted this turn and into patriarchy for whatever reason that is. So it is always very paradoxical. It isn't easy to reconcile. And I think that's also part for me, what of the fascination and mystery too, or just even looking at my own position or assumptions or judgment and then having experiences that really take me beyond, the limitations of my own scholarship and beliefs.
Yeah, I like that way of looking at it. So your book is partly structured around a pilgrimage that you did to Nepal in which you attended the Durga Puja. So what is the Durga Puja and what is its role in Indian culture? Or Nepal, Nepal's culture.
Yeah, we could say it's in South Asia. Of course, there's regional differences everywhere, but ultimately this is an ancient festival that I didn't include this in the book, but that I was looking at the symbols of goddess tracing back to at least the Saraswati Valley civilization. And I'm actually involved in another collaborative project with two feminist spirituality scholars, Vicki Noble and Miriam Robbins Dexter, where we're going back even further along Central Asia and even into what we call the Danube River civilization, to show the persistence of devotion of the of the goddess, of the Divine Mother, for thousands and thousands of years, which still show up in this festival. What's interesting, it's a 9-day festival. It happens every fall, around the time of the fall equinox, always starts on the dark moon, and it's a time of celebrating on a agricultural level, honoring the seasons, honoring the cycles, honoring the harvest and the fruits that have come forth, and as the peoples are preparing for the winter, coming winter season. On another level, it's a way to reenact, to participate in this greater myth, the Devi Mahatmya myth. Also, it's known as the Chandi Path, that actually I believe comes from Bengal, the recitation of Chandi. Chandi is another one of her names, as she takes this form as Chandi, Chandika, Chamunda. She, these fierce emanations of the Divine Mother, who is, Durga, who's called on to fight these demons, to bring balance and justice back in the world. And it's an opportunity on a personal level to really take an, inventory of maybe not only what we've produced, what we've created in the last year, but really what still do we need to be confronting within ourselves in the ways that we're not living in harmony or respectfully within our own family systems, within our communities, within the culture or the world. And so there are, there's all sorts of different ways to approach, from just creating an altar for those 9 days and worshiping the mother in her 3 Maha forms as Kali, this great mother of transformation, destruction, power, birth, Mahalakshmi, for the fruitful sustenance aspects of her expression, then Mahasarasvati, the spiritual fruits of knowledge and wisdom. And they're all ultimately expressions of her. And different rituals are performed. It's very, it's incredible to experience it in Nepal, because it's one of the few places in the Kathmandu Valley that still celebrates all 9 days. Other parts of South Asia will maybe emphasize the last 5 days, because we even see in the myth that's when the battle is the fiercest. That's when Durga really has to take on these demons, and they're just relentless. And it's an opportunity just to be looking at the mind, the way that the mind works, the way that our negative thoughts, feed each other, proliferate, and create more and more, so-called demons in our lives, more obstacles, more difficulties, and what is necessary, what kind of approach is needed to be stopping that, in this inner turmoil, these conditioned beliefs and so forth. So depending on what kind of practitioner, you are, or it's definitely an opportunity for families, community to come together. It is a celebration of community too, but women do have a prominent place they're gifted all these beautiful, red saris or the combs or the bindi that have this significance to what I would call female power, to the reproductive cycle or to the menstrual cycle that can be traced back thousands of years. And it's just maybe more hidden, or maybe it's not out in the open, but there is a way of just honoring our cyclical existence and participation in a greater way at this time, and that it happens every autumn and has been happening for thousands of years is fascinating to me.
Wow. Do you want to talk about maybe a couple experiences you had during that, during the Durga Puja? And is it, I understand it's a celebration, but are there specific practices? Do you do different kinds of practices every day? Like, what is the kind of structure of sadhana that's related to this festival or celebration?
That's a great question. Personally, this is something that I teach, and then have received, initiations into an authorization from a couple of different teachers, teaching the Chandipat, teaching the text, the recitation of that text, and as a way to, worship, a way to participate in the festival, and where you would be, reciting different chapters on different days, reflecting on different aspects of your own experience or your own struggles or conditioned beliefs. And so part of it would be, sitting, whether you're there in Nepal or you're at home sitting at your altar performing these practices. And again, this is what I offer in something I call the Chandi seminars.
Mm.
But on another level, just being at these sites is just every day going on to the different temples. On the first day, it's known as the installation of the sacred vessel. And this is happening both in people's homes, but also at the temples where a priest or priestess, nowadays you do see the priestesses there too, calling in Durga and asking her to reside in this womb pot, in the kalasha, again, the symbol of the yoni. And she takes her place in that pot, is worshipped. Seeds are planted around the pot for the barley plant, the jamara plant, and they're tended to, sung to, the Chandipat is recited to, the kalasha, to the seeds, any other murti or representations of the divine on the altar. And every day, whether it's the family is doing it or maybe they're hiring, sometimes people will hire a priest or a priestess to be doing the full recitation for them, and then going and visiting the different temples. So going to different Kali temples on the first 3 days, but not only limited to those first 3 days, but those are specifically the days where we're looking at the denser tamasic energies, our shortcomings, the habits we need to let go of, and just you going to these beautiful ancient sites, temples and shrines, and offering her back, offering her rice, offering her flowers, offering her, coconut, and asking her to show us, maybe where we have been out of line or alignment with our power, or where we haven't remembered her or honored those around us. And the beauty and power for me, what has been so exciting at these sites, is the longevity of worship. That there's a stone I'm kneeling in front of, and there's, for over 2,000 years, people have been going not only during the festival, but regularly, and worshiping it as Ma, as the Divine Mother. And there's energy there. It's electrifying. Things happen. The mind can stop. Like, it's, to be able to sit and just have all of that chatter, even if it's a second, is so incredible to have that experience. And then to witness others connecting with her in that way. Of course, it's not perfect. There's obviously, westernization, globalization has had really devastating effects. Often, in the last few years when I've gone there, a lot of the younger people aren't participating in the rituals in the way that they used to. And, things are really out of balance, and there's more crime, there's more violence, and there's a lack of meaning, just that I find overall affects us when we're not able to connect or participate in that way. So there's just many different ways of working with it. And even, don't even have to travel there. Of course, there's more potency, but just honoring that, or just attuning yourself to these larger cycles and to these traditions and rituals that have been celebrated for thousands of years, and really inquiring in, okay, well, why would this be meaningful for me? And how would this be of benefit, not only for me, but for my community, for the planet itself? Because really at the core, this ritual is about balance and equality and justice and peace, and stop the violence and bloodshed and disrespect to the earth, to her creatures, and especially to women.
Wow, well, it sounds like we could all use a little bit of that Durga Puja in our lives. So you said it's in the fall. Has it already taken place, or is it?
Yeah. It's just finished. There's actually 4 a year. It depends on which lineage you're looking at, but the two main ones for Durga are in the fall. It's her biggest one, and then again in the spring.
I see. Okay. So given what we've talked about, we've covered a lot of really interesting topics, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe, if there's anything that came up for you sort of over the course of our conversation that you wanted to share, or something that would help kind of wrap things up based on what we've talked about, and then I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're kind of getting up to these days, and we can sort of end on that note.
Let's see. I mean, I feel very complete for now. I don't know if there's anything
Well, what
else.
about maybe just asking the question? So, if I'm a listener and I'd like to cultivate a relationship with the divine feminine in some way, and I recognize that there are so many manifestations, there's so much iconography, and obviously, your book is partial to Durga, and so that would be one thing. But how does someone approach that? I mean, do they sort of pick an image that they resonate with, or do they pick an image that challenges them? I mean, what is the criteria for kind of connecting with some representation of the Divine Mother?
A great question. So, I mean, she's everything. She appears in so many different forms. I mean, there's, when you said, do they pick an image that resonates? I say yes. Do they pick an image that's more challenging? Yes, both. If there's, and also to look for displays, meaning synchronicities or these divine displays, or has, Durga, does that name keep coming up to you? Or every time you hear it in a class, is it like, you're curious, it's just tapping into something? Or maybe, I've had students that have had dreams and had not even known who Durga was and reach out to me. Maybe you're having a dream and there's a name in your dream, or you are attracted to an image, or if you're just curious, look to your own background, look at your own racial ethnic background. You can find her there. Look to the roots of your ancestors. Who were they worshiping, within Judeo-Christian frame, but even going earlier beyond that. And so, I mean, really, she is everywhere. There's a wealth of material, incredible scholarship that has come out of these programs at California Institute of Integral Studies and former programs, New College of California, Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, that you could find, a lot of reliable sources. What I find so fascinating, of course, I'm partial to this, but that here is a living tradition, that we're not speculating, that there are teachers within different lineages. We have, the scholarship to rely on, but we also have practices to engage in, to really have an experience of who she is within ourselves. And on a simple way, though, too, like, let's say that turns you off and you don't want to be within a tradition, or it's like, I'm not interested in learning Sanskrit or chanting in Sanskrit or anything that's related to South Asia. But just ask her to show herself to you. Then show me. Come to me in a form that I can relate to. Please appear to me, Ma. Please let me have an experience of you. That's the most important thing, because, we're so bombarded with so much information and told what to think or not. That let me have an experience of you. And then when you have an experience, like, okay, show me more. I am your child. I don't get it. Or, I need more. I need to experience it more. And also you can say, but be gentle. We'll see what she does, but also just to kind of, because that can be scary to open up to something so unknown, especially when it's so foreign. Yeah. But this is ultimately, I mean, she's neither benevolent or terrifying, like exclusively, but this is a loving force. This is love with a capital L. Like, she is unconditional love, that in this absolute form that comes through more relative forms, appearances, and regardless of which culture or tradition.
Such a great note to end on. Well, Laura, this has been a really beautiful conversation, and so I just want to end asking you about any projects that you have coming up that the listeners might be interested in, where people can find you, workshops, courses, anything like that.
Excellent, thank you. You can find information on my website, which is lauraamazzone.com, LauraAmazzone. In the spring, I have a Chandi seminar series coming up again, which is we're going into the teachings of Durga and the Chandi pot, more from a sadhana perspective. But I also have other offerings, online courses. I have a course right now running called 32 Days of Durga, just to allow you to get familiar with what is she, what are the offerings, what does this mean you worship her on this day, what is her iconography, why would this be useful and relevant to me. in these times. And I also offer pilgrimages to Nepal. I'm going in the spring, and I'll be going next fall for Navratri, and that information is on my website as well. So
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Laura. It's been such a pleasure.
thank you, Jake, very much for having me. Jai Ma.